Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast, Play, Learn, Lead ECE Voices of NL. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Sonia. And this month, we're going to talk about goal number 3 of the framework, play and exploration, with our guest, Lori.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lori. I am an ECE, just about finished the administrative leadership program. So I'm almost a level 3 ECE. And I've been in this field now for 28 years.
That
Wow.
is impressive.
Yeah, I've been in the field in regulated childcare, unregulated day home childcare, family resource programs, and now currently I'm involved in an outdoor play program. So everything is outside.
I love it. Love it. So, I think we're going to learn a lot from you today, Lori.
Hopefully we'll have something to share. We're all at different places in this journey, and we're all in this together. So
Yeah, for sure. Um, we have a few things that we really want to try and talk about. Um, but one of the most important things that stood out to us when we were looking at goal 3 of the framework was just the importance of fostering a love of learning and understanding that if we're taking advantage of those teachable moments, the children are going to want to learn along with us.
hmm
Um, and we were wondering, along with that, we really need to be using open-ended questions, but not just open-ended, but also inquisitive, stirring that desire for learning. And we were kind of wondering if you had any ideas as to how we can rephrase our thoughts quickly in the moment with the children to turn our questions into open-ended and more inquisitive questions for them.
yeah, because it's so easy to just get stuck in, oh, I like what you're doing, or you know,
Mhm.
um, beautiful piece of art. It's important to talk about the process and, like you said, ask open-ended questions. Just like, oh, I saw you use blue crayon today. I see the blue markings in your artwork. Want to tell me about that? Like, is instead of
Right.
asking a question, it's like,
Mhm.
tell me about that. Ask them about that. You know, it, like you said about fostering that learning. Part of being an ECE or a teacher, anybody working with children, is you have to foster that learning and the curiosity in the way that you ask those questions, but making it fun and making them reflect back onto why they're doing it. Like, tell me about that process. I saw you made this shape. Well, why did you make that shape? And, you know,
Right.
asking their thought process on where it's going. And everything is reflection and getting the children to even reflect back on why they're doing it and asking them, why are you doing such a thing? It's so easy to get caught in yes and no questions. But when you
Mhm.
ask yes and no
Mhm.
questions, you're going to get yes and no answers. But when you ask open ended questions, then you're getting them to think about that process and getting them to think about their learning and what they want to share. And then they're going to share more information, like, oh, well, I just drawed a bug and I put blue water underneath it because I saw the bug by the pond. You're not gonna get that curiosity
Right.
and that
Yeah.
extended idea of why they drew what they drew if you don't ask them for what they're doing.
And I think
Yeah.
one thing that I was thinking about while you were saying that was the fact that if we get those stories ahead of time and we can share with the parents, like at the end of the day, this is what I asked and this is what they told me. And then the parent doesn't need to reiterate what we said that the child said, but they'll have the same questions. They'll have it fed
They'll
into
ask
their minds and
questions.
they'll learn that process from the child.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
it's given, like you said, it's just given some background to what is happening or
Yeah.
what the thought process was behind it. Because if you don't know what the thought process behind it is, it I'll tell you an example. A child one time drew a plate of Jig's dinner. the carrots, the turnip, the carrot, potato, everything. Like this is what he had for his dinner. And then took the brown crayon and just covered it all over. So if you had to look at this picture now, it just looked like it was just covered in a brown blob on the page. But if I didn't ask the questions on, I saw you using orange and I saw you using the white and all of those things. Want to tell me about what happened in your picture or what you're doing and all the colors you're using and the brown? And then he was just like, well, that was the gravy. Right. So
Yeah.
then you can explain it to a parent because if you're just coming in and seeing it, it just looks like a brown blob, but you don't know what went on underneath that. So it's asking the children on what they're making. And, you know, that's what sparks their curiosity is when you're like, tell me about that.
Hmm.
Like, what are you thinking about that? What's your next step? It gets them thinking about their thought processes and stuff too, and makes them think about what they're going to do next.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and there's so many benefits to those play experiences. Like, not even just thinking about art, but just in their play, they're even when we're not actively problem solving with them, they are solving problems. They're trying to figure out what's next.
Well, it's all part of the process, right? Like, so it this open-endedness and this fostering curiosity all comes from, like I said, not only art, but every part of their day,
Mhm.
even down to like risky play. It's like you're giving them the language to make them think about their processes. Like a teacher led activity, if you're sitting down and you have an art activity set up and the teacher's saying, okay, now we're going to do this color, now we're going to add this, or you have a set of blocks and you have a set of animals next to it, and that's the only, like, okay, we're going to build a house for this cow, you know, it's taking the curiosity, it's taking
Yeah,
the imagination
Mhm.
away from the child. So if you just lay out these things and give them these parts and these items to explore and see where their creativity goes with it, I mean, it could be a road, it could be a mountain. We don't know. There's such endless possibilities that an item can be. So I think part of that fostering is allowing the child to be curious and explore in a safe, supported environment that they know that the ECE is going to be there for them and support them through the process
Mhm.
yeah.
and help get their needs met if they're having a problem with it or they need a loose part or another tool to add to their play. They feel supported to do that, then they're just going to keep this creativity and this curiosity going because it's endless then.
That
Yeah.
honestly, the answer you just gave to that has my mind in overdrive because you
Yeah.
mentioned risky play, you mentioned teacher-led activities, you mentioned loose parts, and these are all huge aspects of our day to day. And I really want to try and touch on all of them, but I just don't know where to begin,
Well, I
you
mean,
know?
loose parts can be anything, and a loose part can be something so simple as an empty box. Currently at my place of work right now, the children are interested in the big banana boxes, like the boxes bananas come in.
Right.
Yes.
We
Yep.
have those all over the forest everywhere. So those banana boxes have been airplanes, they've been prams for the stuffies, they've been put together as trains. It's a loose part. But by having a loose part and
Okay.
those boxes are just there to use, those are just some of the the things that the children decided on themselves. So, like the airplane thing, we had a child come in and wanted to make an airplane with them, and we used several of them and flattened them, and we had wings on our airplane, and the sides had to be built up. So they found some wool in our bin of yarn. Then he was going around finding planks of wood because we had to build the sides up. So it's loose parts. The wool was the loose part, the sticks, the pieces of wood, the boxes were all loose parts that got created into this whole day play of building this airplane. So having materials free, the children just get to explore with them and use their curiosity to, develop whatever it is. So, and then it brings everybody else in because they're just like, oh, well, I see Taylor's doing this. What can I do with mine? So it just, it's all, it all goes back to this, imagination and bringing back the imagination because so many children right now are overscheduled. They're in routines of, going from this activity to that activity or to screens, and they don't get that opportunity to just be themselves or think for themselves sometimes because
Yeah.
their days are so planned out with
Mhm.
our even their grown-ups being so busy with work, and you have to go from daycare and you have to go home and get supper, and then it's bedtime, it's bath time, everything is so structured. And oftentimes now we see children and they just don't know what to do. So having these loose parts and these fostering their creativity and having things around that they can, just sparks that little bit in them.
Speaking of loose parts, Sonia and I were discussing the other day that like we recognize the creative aspect that comes with loose parts and how like vast possibilities are when you have them. Um, but something that we've struggled with independently, being in the toddler room, is that sometimes was a struggle of like, what do you put in for a toddler room, especially with the younger ones when they're like 18 months old, because there's so many mouthers and
Yeah, well, it's completely different than when you
yeah.
have a preschool or a school age group. I mean, with the olders, you can have things like rocks and small sticks and leaves and all of those things,
Hmm.
or buttons, but when you have the younger children, like you said,
Yeah,
it all goes to their mouths. But you can look at things like empty boxes that could be building things,
yeah.
like empty shoe boxes or pieces of fabric, even um, paper tubes, that's a loose part for them as well. Little squares of fabrics.
Okay.
There's other things other than the little tiny manipulatives that
Yeah.
you can think of. Blankets is another big one that we use, and old sheets,
Okay.
right? Because an old sheet can go over a table and make a tent if you're in an inside space. Or for me, again, where I work
Yeah.
outside, is we use an old sheet or a tarp and put up, and we make like a little fort or like a little, like a lean tube type
Hmm.
fort for the children to go in. So they're exploring that way. Could be empty buckets that they're using for collecting things around the homeroom. There's have to think bigger, not
Yeah.
necessarily
I
smaller for the
I
littles,
think it's almost
and know your group, right?
yeah, I think almost like kind of
Could
gets stuck on the stuff that everybody talks about, like the caps and the rocks and the pine
Right.
cones and
Yeah.
the feathers and like the smaller stuff that
Mm.
when
It could be going to
it's
a paint store or hardware store and asking them for the paint sticks.
yeah.
The little wooden sticks, if you have them, or tiles. The endless, the loose parts is endless. It's a slippery slope to get on, actually, when you're an ECE, because you could have your house full and become an order very quickly with all the things you see, and it's just like, oh, I could use this in program, oh, I could use this in program. But yeah, it can be tricky with the youngers, but you have to think outside of that box on, like you say,
Yeah.
what comes to mind is the bottle caps and things like that. But think a little bit bigger stuff that they can't put necessarily put in their mouth, right?
Yeah.
Could be different types of fabric, could be different types of tape. They could be taping stuff together. Who knows?
Okay.
So I'm wondering, thinking on a bigger scale, how in your program, how does the storage of loose parts look like when it's available to the children? Not like storage, but like how is it presented in the classroom?
Well, we don't. My current program
You're
is,
more
I'm
outside.
yeah, we're a 100% outside program. I work in, a forest school type program,
Mhm.
and our loose parts, a lot of them are milk crates. So we do have a storage shed that we can put things in, but a lot of our stuff is just sourced around the forest: pine cones, sticks, rocks, leaves, plants, any of those things. But we'll bring in things like those banana boxes or other cardboard
Mhm.
boxes. Milk crates are a really great one that we use for storage and stuff. Um, Another great loose part resource is Costco has these lovely black tubs that their flowers are in, and they give them away when they get empty.
Oh,
So,
Okay.
we use those.
interesting.
In the winter, they're really good for making um, snow castles and to build snow forts.
Right.
So
Okay.
our program itself, we don't use a whole lot of resources and materials. We use what's around
Hmm.
us.
Mhm.
So, it's you don't have to be big and elaborate. And the thing is too with loose parts is you want enough of a loose part to provoke that curiosity, but you need enough to be able to explore because if you got a small number and you have a lot of children wanting to use it,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
it's not always about you know having a variety of loose parts, but it's having enough
Enough.
of a
Okay.
loose part to use. Because if you only got 4 tubes and you've got 8 children, like they may want to share or may not want to share. But then, as you said, like you got the youngers and even preschool, if you got buttons that are going to be dumped, and then you got the beads are dumped, and then the bottle caps that are dumped, and it's just like you have to think about those things as well, and how many and what option do you want, because it doesn't necessarily always have to be out, but if you have a smaller quantity of it, and that's
Mhm.
where it comes into fostering the children's creativity, they may say, I need more of this, and you can say, why don't we check our storage space, let's see what we have. So I like loose parts. I remember when loose parts was becoming a very popular thing, and I'm just like, oh no, you know, I'm thinking about all this cleanup. But again, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And if you start small and get the children used to it, because this is where your small groups come into, is introducing these activities and introducing these things and letting the children be creative in a more of a controlled space if it's a smaller group versus just
Hmm.
putting out on your block shelf and the children are just coming in, hey, what's all these things for, and just going poof. It's like laying a few things out in a small group, and a teacher could be just stacking them or making patterns with something and just modeling some of the ideas, like even just putting a couple together and letting the children see what you're doing and then model what they're doing with it. So it just gets a creative thought process going.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
where I struggle is that I think I do too much. And then it just goes everywhere. Just like, ah. And then it gets
Yeah.
overwhelming for them and for us because everything is
Yeah.
everywhere. And then
And
they're,
sometimes even doing up, like if it was a small group, doing up little baskets of loose parts. So it's not like a whole lot of things, but each child or each person has their own little bin of loose parts to start exploring. And then as the creativity and the curiosity grows, then you can add more things into it, or they can bring things in to the play or go find it around the room and bring it into the play, right?
yeah.
So there's a lot of different things you can do with loose parts.
I think about, like you mentioned, how to introduce it to them. And then that makes me think about the difference between teacher led activities and fostering play. That we have a role in each, but there is a fine line. Could
Yeah.
you
Well, it is a
explain the
very
difference, maybe?
yeah, well, there is a fine line because the teacher-led activity is a teacher leading an activity the way that they want it to go. Where a
Hmm.
child-led activity is an activity going the way the child wants to go. So when you're doing um, a child-led activity, then you're sparking, their curiosity, and they're going to explore the activity or the material the way that they want to explore it, not the way that you want to explore it,
Right.
and you're there to support them in that process. A teacher directed activity is more of a structured thing. I'll go back to the baskets, for example. So you have your basket set up for I'm just saying small group activity. So a teacher led would be taking those things and maybe you want to make patterns with them. And so
Mhm.
this is what you're doing. But if you give a child that basket and it's childlike, you're watching what the children are doing. Maybe what's in those baskets are based on an observation that you saw them do earlier in the day or the day before, right? So, like, maybe there is buttons in there and there's beads in there, and you're just giving, maybe you saw them lining up the rocks and the sticks and the pine cones and just collecting them. So then you got a bin for all of that. And then you're just seeing where they're going to bring them. Maybe they're bringing in animals or want some animals to go with that. So you're being supportive with letting them explore those materials and helping problem solve what they would like to next by asking those open-ended questions. Well, I see you're lining up the beads in a square, but you left a little opening right here. What's that for? And they might say, well, this is the barn. This is where the cow is going to go in, as I went back to before. So is asking them asking them.
Yeah.
Communication is key. You have to keep that communication going and talk to them and find out how you're going to know, what they want or
Yeah.
where their curiosity is going. You can't just sit there at the table and it's like, okay, we're just going to make patterns today. Here's a red, here's a blue, here's a red, is a blue. Like they're not getting nothing out of that, but you're like, oh wow, I just saw you make a circle with those pine cones. Like, tell
Hmm.
me about that kind of thing.
I wonder how this would all look like in different age groups. How does creativity look based on developmental levels? And then along with that, I don't know if it's the same in your program, but in the program I work at, around this time of year, we have the ones who are so ready to move. And then the new ones who are coming
Yeah.
in as one steps up. And so you have a big range of developmental needs. So how do you
Mhm.
navigate that?
That is
Yeah.
that's a big tricky one, and you know what? In my years of childcare, I've come across that
Hmm.
so many times. Again, I think a part of that is, like you said, some are ready to move on to school, some are just starting daycare for the first time.
Mhm.
So it's like everybody's at a
Hmm.
different place in their development. And then you have children with some identified needs, some who don't have a diagnosed need, but I have some challenges that they need supports to work through. So I think it's important to do your observations and just watch what the children are interested in, and um being open to letting go sometimes, because I think so many of us get fixated that everybody needs to do this activity or everybody needs to come together, and that's not necessarily the case. You could have a child who is watching and listen to everything you're doing, but they're doing it from the other side of the room at their own time. So I think it's important that
Right.
when we're
Hmm.
planning
Yeah.
activities or we're doing anything, is that it's okay when the child wants to do that. So finding, let me back up, doing that observation, watching your group and seeing what they really want to do or what they're interested in, providing those open-ended loose part activities that the children can explore when they're ready and on their time, and having things available for them. Like it's not just a certain part of the day that things come out. It's just like
Yeah.
letting them explore when they want to. It could be your small group activity, could be exploring and mixing colors, right? But you have a couple children who don't want to come do that. But if you
Hmm.
have that left out, when they're ready, they might come. And then you can sip in as an ECE or a support person, whoever, and foster that at that time. But then it's on the
Hmm.
other end. You have children who just do not want to be part of it and then may become physical or show some emotions and self regulation around that, right? So, this is where I said about having to let go, because sometimes people do get stuck on it's small group, everybody got to come do that, which is not necessarily the case at all.
Hmm.
Is give them a
Definitely.
choice too, right? It's just like, okay, we're going to, I don't know, get ready to go outside. And they're like, nope, I'm not ready. Maybe it's a child that you need to give like a 10-minute reminder to, then a 5-minute reminder to, and we're going to do this. So I know I'm going all over the place. There's so many things just
Hmm.
pops in my head as well as we're talking,
No,
because
that's
it's
okay. Yeah.
no matter what you do, you're going to have children that are going to cause challenges to whatever that part is. whether it's an activity, whether it's a
Yeah.
transition. But this is why I keep saying is observe, know that child, get to know that child, know what works for them. It could be an individual, reminder to tell them that this is happening or whatnot. If they don't want to take part in an activity that everybody else is in, give them an option to what else they could do. It doesn't mean they got free access to the whole room, but it might be, two other areas that they can choose to go in. If that part of the day is a challenge when you want to do an activity with everybody else, is maybe that's a part of your day where your administrator can come in for like the 5 or 10 minutes, which I know is really hard because everybody's so pressed for time. But maybe they can give you an extra set of hands for just those couple minutes because you know that that person is going to, struggle, but you really want to do this activity with the children. Also, look at the time of day that you're doing stuff, right? We're stuck on our schedules, and I know we have to follow our set schedule for licensing and everything else as long. But is maybe your activity is just before lunch or something, and everybody is hungry and dysregulated at that point. You just so maybe first thing in the morning might be a better time, or after lunch might be a better time, or after gym time, or outside time, like is looking at your schedule and seeing what works best for that group. um there's so many different things that you
Yeah.
can do. Again, not everybody will take part, and that's okay. They might never do that activity, and that's okay, as long as they have an
Hmm.
option to do what, something different that you decide that it's okay that they can do. um And also include that child or them children that are causing you some of those challenges in the activity process, like program planning and planning out your day and asking them what they would like to do, like including them in the process of what's going to happen. So tomorrow we're going to do, what would you like to do for an activity? Like it's making them part of the process gives them that little bit of control as well. So they are helping, they're more likely to want to take part if you are including them in that process.
Yeah, like our room recently switched from, like, we used to do weekly planning, and so we'd get a time near the end of the week to plan for the following week. But we found that we were just filling in the
Mhm.
the slots.
Filling in the
We were
blanks.
just filling in the blanks. And so a few months ago we switched to, like, Monday we just slap on a blank like sheet on
Yeah,
our doors on our cupboards, and we're doing so much more
yeah.
because there's no it's not the stress of trying to do what's planned, because you
That's
plan
not
something
child
for
led when you're doing,
no.
right? It's teacher, that's teacher plan.
Yeah,
So if I can share what my team is currently doing.
absolutely.
So we use, because our staff are, got different schedules and everything else, we use Google Drive and Google Documents for a whole lot. So we have a
Mhm.
Google document done up for planning. And in our planning is we write down the materials we need for the day, but after each program, we all take time to reflect on how all the day went. And
Mhm.
we have each child listed, and then we write down what they're interested in that day. One or two things that
Okay.
they're into. Like I know Sally was making mud in the mud kitchen. Um, Joey was grading up chalk,
Mhm.
whatever anybody's doing. And we list that down. And then a part of the reflection at the bottom is what worked well, what didn't work well for the day. So that's how we plan out our next day, is based on what we observed them interested in the day before. And that's some of the
Okay.
materials or some of the things we'll bring in. Now they might never be interested into it, but that's how we help with our planning process for the next time, is
Yeah.
they were interested in that. So let's add this item to our room, or they were interested in cars. Let's bring in some more car books and some more vehicles, or the
Mhm.
boxes so they can create their own. Maybe we
Yeah.
got some wheels or some wood cookies that can be wheels to put next to the boxes to have out and see if they'll create it. So is like
Mhm.
reflection, talking to your team about what worked well, what didn't work well, and then it's just making that little note on every child. If I know it can be kind of tangly when you got a big group, but us having it in our doc, we all
Mhm.
just take, like, if we take 5 minutes when we get time, that's all it takes to fill out that little jot note.
Yeah, because at our center, we use a communication app, so each playroom has an iPad. So, I
Yep.
mean, that could be something as simple as, and using the Notes app, because it's always there on the counter. So just when, you notice
Yeah.
something, just
It's all about teamwork and knowing your team too and the children, because it goes back to like some of the challenging behaviors too, is like some children connect better with one of the ECEs versus the other. So is knowing your
Mhm.
team, and communication is so key. I'll keep
Mhm.
saying it and saying it and say it. Reflection and communication, because you have to communicate what's working and not working for each other, not only the children, but the team. And the team needs the ECEs or the staff need to come together as a team and communicate and share, because if you don't, you're not working as, it's not collaborative, right? You can't
Yeah.
be working against each other. You have to come together and work
Yeah.
together and come up with a plan. And if you don't have some sort of game plan in mind and you go about your day, you're going to become dysregulated at some part of the day. If
Mhm.
you're dysregulated, the children are going to be
Mhm.
Yeah.
dysregulated. So, you need to have some form of
Yeah.
game plan in mind of how things go or who's going to step in where, because children are pretty smart. They're going to pick up on that very quickly and just go like, "Ha, there's my in,"
Yeah.
and throw a wrench in it. And, stuff comes up. We're working with children, things are different, but, you know, and then I'm just going to circle back again. Sorry, I can go on. Like I said,
No, that's
um,
okay.
when you have a child, maybe the activity, because like you said, everybody's at a different developmental level, is then you get those observations, or you write down what a child is interested in. That might be some stuff you can add into those activities that would
Mhm.
help scaffold some of those children's learning, right?
Yeah.
So it's back to
Right.
maybe the
Yeah.
toddlers with paint sticks or just sticks and pine cones and just putting together, or pieces of fabric that are just laid out and they're just like touching them and feeling them. But then you got that little bit older child who's ready to tie them together with some string or some tape and make something out of it. So it's the exact same materials, but it's adding in and scaffolding it to where that child is, right? Is giving
Mhm.
them those extra little loose parts to add into building something. So it's important to scaffold up their learning, like start at the basics for the ones that are still there. But
Mhm.
it's something so simple as, like I said, some string in with the sticks so they can start tying them together and make something. It kind of just goes from that too.
I love that you've mentioned reflection a few times throughout our conversation. And you mentioned it in talking about the children and helping them reflect on their work. And again, you're mentioning it about us reflecting on our work. So it's like it all comes full circle. What we expect the
Yeah.
children to do, we need to do as well
Yeah.
because they're not going to learn if we're not learning,
No.
Yeah,
really.
we're all learning together, right? And it's
Exactly.
part of this process. And they need to be part of the planning and the learning journey that we're all on.
Yeah,
They're a part of our team.
they
Right?
are.
Mhm.
So it's like even sitting down with them, maybe that's something you could do in the morning, is a morning greeting or a morning meeting with them. It's like, okay, what's our plan for today? Like, you know, what would you like to work at today? What's your plan on where you're going to go today? And then it comes back to the end of the day, even. And, this stuff could be so simple as when you're serving snack, it's just asking each child, so morning snack, what's your plan today? Like what activities are you planning on using? What areas are you working on, or would you like to do? And then it goes back to even afternoon snack, or at the end of the day when you're helping them get ready to go home, is like, well, what did you do today?
Mhm.
Right? So is
Mhm.
is that reflective practice and that thinking ahead for that critical thinking on what would I like to do today? And then it goes back to the end of the day is like, well, what did I do today? Where
Yeah.
did you play? Because how many times do a parent pick up a child and they say, what did you do today? Nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
or
just
like,
like,
I don't
I didn't do
know.
nothing. So it starts that thinking process, right? So I'm going to do this. So then you're planning for it and then you're actioning it. So you're actually doing it. And then it goes back to reviewing it and your reflection on what you did. So, that's important part of any journey and any of us. So like us, the children, everybody, right, is reflection on your day.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think Taylor mentioned that we use a communication app, and I love it. And I love how much we get to share with the parents throughout the day. Um, but sometimes we run the risk of disconnecting.
Yeah.
If we're not sharing those pieces at the end of the day too, especially for the child to hear, what they did, and for the parent to hear and be reminded at the end of the day what their child
Mhm.
did, so that they can have not just us communicating with them, but that that extra push to help them open up communication with their child on the way home too.
And it just
Right?
validates what the child did that day is
And
Mhm.
they're
important.
learning,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that we do, like you say, you got your communication tool, is we take pictures throughout the day as well, and we turn
Mhm.
them into very quick learning stories or little reels. And when we share them because we have a private Facebook
Right.
group,
Mhm.
same sort of concept, but we'll give a little content on what today we explored Mucky River, we made airplanes with the banana boxes, whatever. And that just
Mhm.
also is a communication tool that the
Mhm.
parents can then say, "Oh, I tell me about this picture," right? Like
Mhm.
I seen that Taylor, I wrote that you guys did this today. So it just helps start that conversation
Yeah.
as well, you know? Um, yeah, I'll keep going back to it. Communication and reflection. This is how we learn and we do things, So, and partnerships. Everybody's in this as a partner. We're,
Mhm.
the staff, the children, and the parents. So it's important that they share stuff, we share stuff, and everybody knows that they're an important part of that collaboration and that team of everybody together.
Hmm. Definitely.
Something that we kind of were talking about the other day that we wanted to get your take on is how can you help a child who is so deeply into their creative play transition with the group without impacting that creativity? Especially when it's like a necessary transition, like we need to go outside or we need to go to lunch or we need like snack is more like a free flow snack, so they don't necessarily have to go at that time. But sometimes they're just so deep into their creative experience, and it can be very difficult to try and navigate them away from that. Is there a way to do that without like
Yeah,
negatively impacting?
I think that is a very challenging one
Hmm.
because, like us all, when we get deep into something, it's really hard to give it up. You
Hmm.
don't want to leave it, you're into it.
Yeah.
I, I'm that way myself. When I'm into something, that's it. I can't not stop. So I think I mean, each individual person is different, each personality is different. I think a couple of things here is giving them time.
Hmm.
So, like, you don't want to, they need uninterrupted free play, right?
Yeah.
So if they're engaged in free play, can we look at our schedule and say, okay, yeah, I know it's 11 o'clock and it's outside time. Can we push it a little bit longer and push, our day, change up our schedule a little bit to allow them to finish up their activity? And I know sometimes in a schedule you can't do that because of timing and breaks and
Hmm.
everything else. I mentioned it earlier too, is maybe that child needs that visual, a visual clock that they can see that the time is going
Hmm.
down. Maybe it's given, I know we give 5-minute reminders that things are changing or we're ending. Maybe that child or that individual needs like some countdown verbally told to them themselves, and making sure they got
Mhm.
your attention, that that's happening. Because sometimes if you're engrossed in your play, you're not necessarily always hearing those messages
Mhm.
from your teachers. I don't, I think it goes back to each individual program, and maybe if it's a small group or a large group, or if
Mhm.
it's just free play, maybe again it looks at something in your schedule, right? Like if
Mhm.
we know that it's outside time and you know that that child is very interested in it, well, can we change the schedule a little bit to have a little bit longer time, or have that start sooner versus right in the middle transition time? Is there a person that can come help support?
Mhm.
Because maybe it's once everybody's out of the room, then this child's realize, oh, I need to be done now. So
Mhm.
I honestly think it, just because I guess over my years I've seen different ways that this can go with children and different activities, and each individual is so different that it's hard to say what would work properly or what would work good for each person,
Yeah.
because every dynamic is so different. But I like to go directly to the person and just say, 5 more minutes, we're going outside. 4 more minutes, we're going outside. And sometimes the minutes don't work, so you might need to do first, then,
Mhm.
like, and giving them those messages up front, right?
Yeah.
And it could be, you could be starting, like you said, if during gross in an activity and it's transition time to outside, maybe that starts before you even call the 5 minutes to clean up, like it's like, okay, this is soon
Right.
going to happen. So like, what can we do in your activity? Can you save that activity for them for a later time? Like, can
Mhm.
you put a boundary around that and a sign that's just says, work in progress, so everybody knows that that's safe? Can you put it up or put it away for a later in the day or next time?
Mhm.
Letting the
Yeah.
child know that you're going to be having to go outside when they, if it's a child that that gets into an activity and never wants to leave, is giving in them reminders right in the beginning that, we're soon going to be going outside, like you have X number of time, or help get them part of that process. And that plan is just
Mhm.
like, okay, what can we do with it? What would you like to do? And even if you giving them 5 minutes, you can even ask them, it's like, okay, we have to transition to outside now. What would you like to do with
Yeah.
this? Or how many minutes would you like? Because that gives them a little bit of control over it
Mhm.
as well. And letting, I think it goes back to
Yeah,
too, is
absolutely.
relationship building. So if the child knows they can trust you, they're more than willing to sometimes compromise with you,
Yeah.
because they know that you're going to follow through on what it is that you say you're going to do. So like if you say like, I will keep this safe for you to come back to at the end of the day or whatever time of the day is good, and you follow through with that. But then if you say, yeah, we'll put this up and safe, and then somebody destroys it, they're going to learn not to trust you. So I think it goes back and forth with like a trust and building that relationship. So maybe it's the same person that gives the messages every time, or one of two people in case somebody is out, like. So I really think it, again, it depends on the individual child and the situation and the circumstances, and there's so many things around that. Like I
Mhm.
said, there's scheduling, there's timing, there's what's happening before. So again, that goes back to your observations and your reflection of, that this happens every single day. Well, as part of your team and your reflection is looking at your day and knowing that this part of your day is not working, well, how can we change that? What can we do in our environment? What can we do in our daily routine or as a team to support one another to make that work for each other? Sorry, that was a lot of rambling on
No,
on
it
what
was
it is.
great.
But
No.
again,
I
it
love that
all,
you
like
brought up
you
the
said,
trust part and the
yeah,
connection.
they have to trust. You
Yeah.
have to have connection. You have to
Mhm.
have trust. And that goes both ways with the children, the parents,
Mhm.
and your coworkers. You got to know you got each other's back, and you can rely on one another, right?
And
Yeah.
So,
so many challenges that we do have come back to autonomy and choice and trust and
yeah,
connection
Mhm.
so
yeah.
much.
And children want
Yeah.
that. They want that so much because so much of their lives are planned and done for
Yeah.
them and they're told what to do. So when you can give them a choice,
Hmm.
it makes a difference. And you give them a choice of something that they can do, that is realistic, that you can allow them to do at that time, right? And that way when they also learn then that when you're serious and say no about something when you have to, I know we don't use the word no, but sometimes it's safety.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to use that they can respect that you mean business at that point, like that, okay, this is really important. I have to listen.
Yeah.
You brought up safety, and that the one thing that I was still trying to think, how are we going to talk about this? But understanding the difference in allowing children to explore their boundaries, but also keeping them safe. And then with the autonomy, I think about if we're trying to keep them safe, it's no good to say, oh, be careful, or explaining what's going to happen. Like, we really
Like,
need to have those conversations
well,
with
if
them,
you
let
say be
them figure
careful,
it out.
yeah, if you're saying be careful, they're like,
Of
what do
what?
I need to be careful
Yeah.
of what,
Yeah.
right? So I'm our language is what's your message,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
What's your message? Because if you scream or you yell at somebody, it's like, well, what are you trying to tell them? They don't
Yeah.
understand. We have to
Yeah.
use our words to explain what it is we want and then supporting the child who is screaming whatever with those words. But when you're involved in risky play, I mean, risky play brings so many benefits to a child. There's self regulation, there's, our physical overall well being, you know, children are living such sedentary lives these days. So it's important that they get to take these risks and explore. But when you're making those boundaries for the children, it's including them again in that process,
Yeah.
is right. Is like, how do you feel when you climb that tree? Do you feel stable? Is it wiggly? Um, I noticed that these rocks are slippery right here. How do you think we could walk around them? There's a patch of ice. I see that the ice in front of us is really slippery. How do you think we can get a rock set instead of say, be careful, there's a patch of
Yeah.
ice?
Yeah.
It's like asking them, what do you think we can do? I noticed that that tree branch is a little pointy and sharp. You know, what do you think we could do about that?
And again, that problem solving.
And it's
Yeah.
problem
Mm-hmm.
solving, but we know the answers.
Yeah.
We know what can
Mm-hmm.
be done, but it's getting the children to think about those problem solving and making that for themselves, like is thinking that process through for themselves. And they're coming up with boundaries and they're coming up with ideas on how to keep each other safe or what you can do about
Yeah.
it, you know and then they're reminding everybody else. It's just like, oh, look, this is this,
Mm-hmm.
this is this. But they're then also looking at the safety,
Yeah.
they're looking at the risks and just trying to decide on what they want to do or how they can do it
Hmm.
safely, because it helps them to become independent and face their fears. But again, as part of an ECE who's fostering a positive learning environment, we're supporting them and letting them explore and having those opportunities because they know that we're there to support them if they need it, if they're stuck or they're helped. But
Mm-hmm.
it's that thinking process on how to do it,
Yeah.
right? Like it's thinking the process through. Okay, well, you want to climb that tree. Well, where do you think we need to put our bodies? You know, do you feel supported up there? Is it wiggly? Where are your feet gonna go? It's just like talking through the whole process. So I'm a big was a person who was terrified of risky play and all of that. And I like to reflect back on my own journey of where I come since I first started my ECE career to where I was, back all of these years. And, so interesting to see the benefits and see, I guess, what works and just getting again, like reflection back, right? And just
Yeah.
the communication and talking things through. As I said to you guys earlier, it was just like everybody's at a different place in their journey. And you know what one team member is comfortable with, another team member might not be. So the risky play thing, it goes back to coming together as your team and your staff and those observations, and talking about, I'm not comfortable with them doing that. I don't want to see them with scissors outside the table, like,
Mhm.
but is making those plans, because it's important that children have these experiences. Children need to
Yeah.
experience these risks and take risks and things like that. So is like making that plan with your team on who can support that,
Mhm.
Right.
right? And it
Um,
could, and that goes back to even, a challenging behavior. Maybe somebody else can keep their body regulated more than somebody else, or somebody's had a rough night, like,
mhm.
it's communication
Mhm.
is key on how you're going to do it, and making those plans together to support everybody involved, right? So
Like, I know for myself, um, I I can handle some risky play, and there's some that make me nervous, but I think I'm pretty good at, like, recognizing that that's just me being nervous. There's nothing not necessarily not safe happening, and
mhm.
so, like, there's some coworkers that I'm like, "Can you supervise this? Because there's nothing wrong with them doing this, but I know that I'm likely going to make them nervous if I'm over there
Mhm.
being nervous."
Well, again, that's a
And
part of of recognizing that in yourself, right?
yeah.
And being comfortable enough to share that with your people and your team, because you're going to become dysregulated, and you do not want a child who's involved in any type of risky play to become
No.
dysregulated while they're taking part, right?
No.
So you have to remain calm and be supportive in that process. And when I'm doing any sort of risky play with the children, I always have veto, right? Like, it's just like, okay, if at any time I feel that this is unsafe, we're pausing it, right?
Mhm.
So it's just like they know that too. Everything got to have boundaries and rules. So a lot of times too, like, our children sometimes like to take part in stick play, which is another whole controversial thing for some places.
Mhm.
But we have boundaries and we make the rules together. Yes, obviously there's some safety rules we have to follow, and there's certain guidelines that we have to follow. But the children are a part of that
Right.
process. For example, even if we're playing tag, it's like everything is about consent. So it's like the children come together. It's like, okay, we're going to play tag. Where are you okay to be touched? Right? So that way we don't have a child being pushed from the back and pushed face down because the child is tagging them.
Mhm.
It's like, I'm okay if you touch my shoulder. So then the person knows we're going to touch the shoulder. So it goes back to consent and talking to the children and making that plan with them so they can take part in something, but they're making a plan and they know what the process is and what is expected and not expected. So when they're a part of that process, they're going to know that. So that goes back to the risky play. It goes back to any part of your day. It goes back to your planning. It goes back to just your schedules, including the children into all of those processes. Then they know what is expected of them, what is expected of their teachers, and there's, everybody's knows what's happening, because it's the unknown is what causes sometimes a lot of the dysregulation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you know
Yep.
then it goes back to the trust, because everybody's working together, everybody knows their role, where they need to be and what they need to do, and feel supported in that.
I love everything we've talked about. I really do. I love all the power that we're giving to the children through these conversations, and letting understanding that the exploration is theirs. It's not ours, it's
Yeah.
theirs.
Yeah.
It is, and I mean our job is just be our job as early childhood educators are being there to
Yeah.
facilitate and take their lead, right? Like, and watching what they want and just going with that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah.
about that. And when you can let go of the control of everything got to be a certain way, and you can just lead through the child and look through everything through their lens and explore and let the children lead, they lead into some very wonderful experiences. And creativity, and
Yeah.
then they grow up when you've been in the field this long, and then they come back to you as young adults, and you feel like, yeah, it's pretty amazing journey, and it's a pretty magical
Yeah.
job to have as
Yeah.
an
Thank you
ECE.
so much, Lori, for coming and for chatting with us. And I've learned so much. I really have. And I have so much that I've soaked in, and I'm gonna watch this
Yeah.
again and I'm gonna be like, yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think that so much is going to be learned when people watch this episode, because I- I've just had like revelations bursting in my
Yeah.
head
And
the
like,
whole time. So I'm really grateful to you for coming and joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. As I shared, this is a big passion of mine. And like I said, we're all here together, and it's important that we all support one another,
Absolutely.
and we're always learning from one
Yeah.
another.
Awesome. Thank you.
I really found a lot of what Lori said really helpful and thought provoking. And I'm kind of excited to take some of what she said and like the ideas that she gave and bringing it into the playroom, honestly. What about you?
Yeah, for sure. One thing that stood out for me was when she was speaking about having the children pre-plan their play. And
Oh, okay.
it made me think about the process in high scope. Um, Plan,
Yeah.
do, review.
Mm-hmm.
So Lori was using different language, but like it was very much in line with that. She was talking about planning and going through the process and having the children reflect. And as much as we don't want to slow down the children's play, I think that giving them that opportunity to take ownership and responsibility for their play before and after, and giving them the skills to become intentional in their play and problem solving when their plan doesn't go exactly as they had hoped,
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Yeah.
and then it also put me on a little tangent of, I remember when I was doing the diploma program, and then when I was doing my post diploma certificate, and again when I was doing research in the degree program, and we were talking about high scope, Bank Street, Montessori, all these things that are
Mm-hmm.
not prevalent here in Newfoundland.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself while I was studying, I was like, oh, am I ever going to use this? But really, we can and we do.
Yeah.
It's just not the exact language. It's just kind of like what Lori did. She rephrased it and
Yeah.
made
Like
it
you can kind of,
relevant.
yeah, like you can kind of take little bits from all the different types
Yeah.
and like bring it into what we do.
And then again, with the planning, the children planning their play, I thought about the fact that sometimes their plans do not align with our level of comfort or our idea of what is appropriate or of value.
Yeah, especially when it comes to something like what we were talking about with Lori earlier as well, like risky play.
Yes.
Like, and kind of like how I had said to Lori, there are there's some level of risk play that I am all for. I can do it no problem. But there are some other levels that I'm like, "Ugh, it makes me nervous and like I get like my insides just get so tight. But I can also recognize there's nothing wrong with them doing that.
Yeah.
Like it's still just because I'm uncomfortable doesn't mean they need to stop. But I know that there's other staff that are totally fine with that activity that they're doing. And I'll go and say, hey, do you mind going to supervise over there, please? Because I feel like I could throw up. but
Yeah.
but like there's nothing wrong with them doing it.
Right.
And they're like, "Yep, no problem." Um, but that's it kind of makes me think back to the first year that I was in the toddler room with that group. Um, and they loved jumping off the highest, in the grassy playground, the highest steps.
Right. We had the tree stumps.
We had the tree
Yeah.
stumps, and a little mister that was like this big wanted to be like, "Yeah, I can do it too." And it made some other staff nervous, but it didn't make me
Right.
nervous. And so I I mean, even at just under 2 years old, they're like, "Oh, I want to jump." I said, "Okay, well, if you want to jump, just come find me.
Right.
Like, bring, if you want to jump, just say, Taylor, I want to jump." And, I'll come and help you, or even I'll just stand there so that you know that I'll catch you if you slip or whatever. Um, and they even at that young of an age, they knew that for those kinds of things, we'll go get Taylor. They don't, I don't highly doubt that their brain goes, "Oh, Miss Taylor is very comfortable, so I'm going to go get her." But just because I said, like, prefaced with them like early on that I will happily help them and make sure keep them
Hmm.
safe, they just intuitively know, oh, that's where I go for this activity.
Yeah.
And even with older groups, they've started to learn that when they want to do some of the bigger, riskier play, they'll go ask the other staff and not me.
Right.
Because we've had the conversation with them that, and I never say it makes me nervous, but I was like, "Oh, do you know who loves things like that? This person." And I
Yeah.
think like the older they get, you can have those bigger conversations with the more risky play as their development grows about when it's appropriate to do the risky play. And sometimes it's could be in relation to because of which staff is there. And sometimes it's in relation to the fact that, the 18-month old and 24-month olds are out there and
Hmm.
it might not be appropriate
Yeah.
to do certain things with those little ones because they want to be just like
Hmm.
them. And they get very frustrated and discouraged because they physically are unable to
Yeah.
do it.
And I think too, if it's safe
Mhm.
enough for us to allow them to do what they're doing, then we should find those ways for them to get those
Mhm.
outlets of the risky play. But also, if it's not safe, not just saying, no, sorry, that's not
Mhm.
safe, but getting them to come to the conclusion and the reasoning with us.
Yes. Well, actually, like
Yeah.
just the other day, we were in the room and in my room, like yours, we have the gross motor area. And two of the girls were holding hands and spinning around in a circle really, really fast. And I was like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, whoa. I need you to stop for a second." And so they stopped, and I said, "I
Mm.
need you to look around of what you're standing beside. There's a chair right there, there's a bench right there, there's a table right here. So if you trip and fall, look at all of the things that we could hit." I said, "Maybe inside the playroom isn't a great spot to hold hands and spin
Yeah.
around really, really fast. Do you know what is a really great spot to do that? Outside in the playground." I think even just like kind of like you said, not just saying no, but explaining why it's not necessarily safe for that moment and telling them when it might be appropriate
Yeah.
if there is an appropriate time for that activity. Kind of like when all the children want to do
Exactly.
somersaults
Yeah.
and cartwheels and stuff inside. It's like, listen, this room isn't that big and there's 16 of you. Somebody is going to get a foot in the face. Somebody's
Yeah.
going to get a foot somewhere, and that's not going to feel very good.
And this episode was about play and exploration, right?
Yeah.
So we look at the exploration piece.
Mhm.
We don't want to take that creativity and that desire to explore and squash it
No.
because that's not emergent curriculum,
No, it really is not. Yeah.
right? Because we're saying, okay, no, sorry, that interest is not aligning with our level of comfort,
Yeah. Yep.
essentially. Because for the most part, we can find ways to foster that creativity, that desire for those
Mhm.
risks and the exploring and figuring out, will this work? Is this okay?
Yep.
Because they will figure it out.
Yes, they will.
So I'm really excited because our next episode is actually on emergent curriculum. And I have no idea where that will take us because it's a huge
It's such a
topic.
huge topic. It could go in so many
But
different ways.
yeah, so that's our next month. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that.
Me too. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, and I'm really excited for it. Thanks so much for tuning in with us again this month, and we can't wait to see you next time. Bye.
Bye.